Hello guys and welcome again to the online series of learning IELTS with MS Education. Myself Disha Patel, and in today's lesson of grammar we'll be learning about types of sentences that are used in your IELTS exams for writing purpose mainly. So let us begin with today's lessons.
Today we will learn types of sentences. There are total 4 types of sentences: simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and compound complex sentences. Let us start with the simple sentences. A simple sentence has only the most elemental building blocks of a sentence: a subject and a verb used in a complete thought, also called an independent clause. In other words, a simple sentence contains a subject and a verb. Also, simple sentences are usually short and they do not have any conjunctions in the sentence for many cases. Now, let us see some examples of the simple sentences. The first one is, Joe waited for the train. Here, in this sentence, Joe is the subject and waited is the verb. Moving towards the second example, the train was late. Here, in this statement, the train is the subject and was is the verb. Now, let us see another example. Ross and Rachel took the bus. Here, Ross and Rachel is the compound subject and took is the verb. And lastly, I looked for Ross and Rachel at the bus station. Here, I is the subject and looked is the verb. So, these were the examples for simple sentences. Now, we shall see some examples for compound sentences. Firstly, let us learn its definition. Compound sentences is made of two independent clauses together with a conjunction. In simpler words, a compound sentence refers to a sentence made up of two independent clauses or complete sentences connected to one another with a coordinating conjunction. The coordinating conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or yet, and so on. Now, let me give few examples for compound sentences. The first one is, Joe waited for the train, but the train was late. Here, you can see that we have connected two independent clauses. Joe waited for the train and the train was late using but. Now, we should see some other examples. I looked for Ross and Rachel at the bus station, but they arrived at the station before noon and left on the bus before I arrived. Here, I looked for Ross and Rachel at the bus station is the independent clause, and they arrived at the station before noon and left on the bus before I arrived is another independent clause. Both are connected using but again. Next, Ross and Rachel arrived at the bus station before noon and they left on the bus before I arrived. Here, Ross and Rachel arrived at the bus station before noon is the first independent clause, which is connected to second independent clause. They left on the bus before I arrived using and. And the last example is, Ross and Rachel left on the bus before I arrived, so I did not see them at the bus station. Here, Ross and Rachel left on the bus before I arrived is the first clause and it is connected to second independent clause. I did not see them at the bus station using so. The one thing to note here is that we have used the comma before writing the conjunction which you need to know. So, these were the examples of compound sentences. Next to that, let us see the complex sentences. Starting with the definition, a complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and one or more independent clauses connected to it. Here, a dependent clause is similar to an independent clause or complete sentence, but it lacks one of the elements that would make it a complete sentence. In other words, dependent clause has no complete idea and it does not make a meaningful sentence. Examples of dependent clauses include the following. Because Ross and Rachel arrived at the bus station before noon. Another one is while he waited at the train station. And the last one is after they left on the bus. As you can see, dependent clauses such as those above cannot stand alone as a sentence, but they can be added to an independent clause to form a complex sentence. While the independent clauses can go first in the sentence, followed by the dependent clause. The subordinate conjunctions are used to introduce the dependent clause in the sentence. Now, let us see some examples for the same. Firstly, when I got home from work yesterday, I watched TV for an hour. Here, I got home from work yesterday is dependent clause and I watched TV for an hour is the independent clause. Here, note that we have used comma after writing the dependent clause. So please note that while we write the dependent clause first in the sentence, we use comma after it. But if we write the independent clause first, there is no need to write the comma in the sentence. Let us now see another examples. I love to travel because I get to meet a lot of interesting people. In this sentence, I love to travel is independent clause and I get to meet a lot of interesting people is an dependent clause. Next is, even though the exam was quite difficult, all the students passed. Here, the exam was quite difficult is dependent clause and all the students passed is the independent clause. Let me know if you need any help. So now, I hope that you will easily be able to tell which are independent and dependent clauses in the following sentences. So, pause the video and try to figure out the answers on your own before you hear my answers. Moving towards the next example, you can't go out and play until you have finished your work. Here, you can't go out and play is independent clause and you have finished your work is dependent clause. So, these were the examples of complex sentences. I hope you have understood the types of sentences. Thank you for attending the class. If you have any queries, please write to us in the comment section. We will make sure that your doubts are solved as soon as possible. I'll see you in the next class.